Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, June 24th, 2022. Supreme Court overturns the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that made abortion a constitutional right for half a century, leaving it up to states to decide how to regulate abortion. Justice Samuel Alito writing for the majority, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. The case involved a challenge to a Mississippi law that banned abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Chief Justice John Roberts upheld that law, but did not sign on to the decision to overturn Roe. Coming up, a reaction from Republican and Democratic members of Congress, plus President Biden and Vice President Harris, and we'll get analysis of the decision from Washington Post Supreme Court reporter Robert Barnes. Also today, U.S. House joining the Senate in passing a gun violence prevention bill that was negotiated between Democrats and Republicans. It includes enhanced background checks for gun buyers under age 21, closing the so-called boyfriend loophole in red flag laws, and funding mental health programs. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Germany ahead of the G7 Leaders Summit, defending the extent of U.S. military support for Ukraine and fending off Russia's invasion. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson getting questions about his leadership after two members of his Conservative Party lost local elections. We begin outside the Supreme Court.
Right now, the people of this country, on behalf of women and girls.
Whereas NBC News in Washington, D.C. reports droves of protesters descending on the Supreme Court Friday in the wake of justices overturning the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade case, eliminating the constitutional right to abortion after 50 years. Protesters for and against the federal right to abortion gathered outside the court within moments. Cheers erupted from anti-abortion rights demonstrators, and some women were seen crying. The Supreme Court has been surrounded by 8-foot-tall fencing since shortly after a draft opinion of the case was leaked on May 2nd. U.S. Capitol Police said protesters are allowed to peacefully demonstrate as long as they follow officers' directions. The Washington Metropolitan Police Department is on high alert and will be under a full departmental activation until Tuesday. That according to police and Department of Homeland Security officials. House Republicans holding a news conference welcoming the ruling. Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers from Washington State is ranking Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee.
First of all, I thank God for this day. Thank God that His mercies are new each day, and He is the giver of life. And I ask for the next 50 years and beyond in our country, how are we going to define the greatest human rights issue of our generation? This Supreme Court decision marks a chance for us to restore hope and healing to every family in this country, moms and children at every stage of life. And may it begin with each one of us doing our part to protect and celebrate all life in this greatest experiment greatest experiment in self-governance that the world has ever known. However, Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats are forcing an extreme agenda on America through their Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act. It would nationalize abortion all across this nation, making America just as radical as China and North Korea. It legalizes discriminatory abortions at every stage based upon sex, race, or disability. It overrides state laws that protect women from coercion. There's no part of this that celebrates the life, the dignity, the value of every life. I think about my friend, Chloe. Chloe is a beautiful, smart young lady with Down syndrome. And at 18, she's appeared before the UN twice and spoken. And she told the world, embrace, don't erase Down syndrome. She's helped pass laws at the state level that would make sure that parents, when they receive that prenatal diagnosis of having a baby with Down syndrome, that they would actually get accurate information as to the potential of that life. Democrats want to eliminate laws like Chloe's. We must stand together and say, enough. The court affirmed today that every life is worth living. My hope, my prayer is that America will reclaim our identity as a nation whose God-given rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all.
Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers, Republican from Washington State, at a news conference with other House Republicans. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, putting out a statement saying the Supreme Court's landmark ruling in Dobbs is courageous and correct. This is a historic victory for the Constitution and for the most vulnerable in our society. Justice Samuel Alito, in the majority opinion, writing Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. He went on, and far from bringing about a national settlement of the abortion issue, Roe and Casey have inflamed debate and deepened division. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, with this reaction.
What this means to women is such an insult. It's a slap in the face to women about using their own judgment to make their own decisions about their reproductive freedom. And again, it goes well. I always have said the termination of a pregnancy is just their opening act. It's just their front game. But behind it, and for years I have seen in this Congress opposition to any family planning, domestic or global, when we have had those discussions and those debates and those votes on the floor of the House. This is deadly serious, but we are not going to let this pass. A woman's right to choose reproductive freedom is on the ballot in November. We cannot allow them to take charge so that they can institute their goal, which is to criminalize reproductive freedom, to criminalize it. Right now, they're saying in states that they can arrest doctors and all the rest. What is happening here? What is happening here? A woman's fundamental health decisions are her own to make in consultation with her doctor, her faith, her family, not some right-wing politicians that Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell packed the court with.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at her weekly news conference in Washington. Supreme Court reporter for the Washington Post Robert Barnes writes that the court overturned the fundamental right to abortion established nearly 50 years ago in Roe v. Wade, a stunning reversal that could alter the nation's political landscape and leave states free to drastically reduce or even outlaw a procedure that abortion rights groups said is key to women's equality and independence. He joins us now by phone. Thank you so much for being here. What was the majority's reasoning in this case?
Well, the majority that overturned Roe said that it was wrongly decided from the beginning, more than 50 years ago, that the Constitution is silent on the question of abortion. The court should not have found it to be a fundamental right, and that it should be returned to the states and their elected representatives.
Originally, when this came out, the bulletin was a 5-4 decision, and then it became 6-3. What's the details on that?
Well, there are two things at issue here, because the court is always looking at something specific. In this case, they were looking at a specific law from Mississippi that had not been allowed to go into effect yet, that said that abortions are pretty much not available after 15 weeks in Mississippi. There were 6 members of the court who said that those lower court decisions were wrong, that law should be allowed to go into effect. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, joined his fellow conservatives in that. But Chief Justice Roberts said that his colleagues had gone further than they needed to, that there was no need to overturn Roe v. Wade or the subsequent decision, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which said that, which reaffirmed Roe. He said that Mississippi's law could have been upheld without overturning those precedents, and he thought that the court shouldn't have gone that far.
And anything in the dissent that struck you?
The dissent was quite striking, and it was written by all 3 of the court's liberals. They said that that it was a blow to women's equality, and that under the court's majority decision, a woman is not in control of her body anymore from the moment of fertilization. in striking language, they said that what could be a miracle and a wonder for many women, that of giving birth, becomes a nightmare when it is forced upon them against their will.
We're talking with Washington Post reporter Robert Barnes. The focus now on the states. You say that they can basically legislate the way they want to on abortion, but at the same time, there have been calls for Congress to act. In the case now with a Democratic majority, to codify Roe, although if Republicans take over, they may want to outlaw abortion. Explain how that would work. What happens if there's a federal law now on abortion?
Well, a federal law could sort of overrule some state laws, but be very hard to do. We've already seen that attempts to codify Roe have not been successful in the Senate, which is so closely divided. It seems very unlikely that Congress could ever agree on that. And the sort of thrust of the opinion here was this will return the issue to the states. Some states in advance of this have solidified abortion rights and say that their state constitutions provide such a right. Others have gone the other way. There are 13 states that have said that they will try to immediately outlaw abortion in their states now that Roe has been overruled. And in general, there are probably about half the states in the country that will either outlaw abortion or pass laws that are extremely restrictive about the procedure.
And finally, what does today's decision about abortion mean for other constitutional rights that were based on the privacy right, like contraception and gay marriage?
Well, the majority opinion says that this opinion doesn't affect anything except abortion, that abortion is unique because it involves what some believe to be the taking of a human life at any stage. And so they said this doesn't affect anything else. In a concurring opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas says that he agrees with that, except that he thinks that the same reasoning that went into Roe is, as you said, underlies the court's decisions on contraceptive, saying that states can't outlaw homosexual conduct, and that led to the decision that said that marriage must be offered to same-sex couples. And so he says perhaps they can be upheld under other constitutional provisions. So we're a little bit of limbo there, and the people who said that this decision would go beyond abortion are feeling vindicated in reading Justice Thomas's words.
Robert Barnes, Supreme Court reporter with the Washington Post. Find his story at WashingtonPost.com and follow him on Twitter at SCOTUS Reporter. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Another paragraph from today's Supreme Court majority opinion, written by Justice Samuel Alito. Our decision returns the issue of abortion to those legislative bodies, and it allows women on both sides of the abortion issue to seek to affect the legislative process by influencing public opinion, lobbying legislators, voting, and running for office. Women are not without electoral or political power. It is noteworthy that the percentage of women who register to vote and cast ballots is consistently higher than the percentage of men who do so. That from the decision. President Joe Biden today at the White House also emphasizing that now that Roe has been overturned, it's important for Americans to vote and be involved in the political process.
Today is it's not hyperbole to suggest a very solemn moment. Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country. 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade was decided and has been the law of the land since then. This landmark case protected a woman's right to choose, her right to make intensely personal decisions with her doctor, free from the interference of politics. It reaffirmed basic principles of equality, that women have the power to control their own destiny, and it reinforced a fundamental right of privacy, a right of each of us to choose how to live our lives. Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. As chairman and ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as vice president and now as president of the United States, I've studied this case carefully. I've overseen more Supreme Court confirmations than anyone today, where this case was always discussed. I believe Roe v. Wade was the correct decision as a matter of constitutional law and application of the fundamental right to privacy and liberty in matters of family and personal autonomy. It was a decision on a complex matter, and through a careful balance between a woman's right to choose earlier in her pregnancy and the state's ability to regulate later in her pregnancy. A decision with broad national consensus that most Americans of faith and backgrounds found acceptable, that have been the law of the land for most of the lifetime of Americans today.
President Biden at the White House. There have been protests across the country for several weeks over this issue since the draft Supreme Court opinion in the case was leaked, including in front of some justices' homes, and in one instance, a person charged with trying to kill Justice Brett Kavanaugh. President Biden today urging all protests over this issue should be nonviolent.
I call on everyone, no matter how deeply they care about this decision, to keep all protests peaceful. Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable. Threats and intimidation are not speech. We must stand against violence in any form, regardless of your rationale.
President Biden at the White House. Former President Donald Trump issuing a statement, today's decision, which is the biggest win for life in a generation, along with other decisions that have been announced recently, were only made possible because I delivered everything as promised, including nominating and getting 3 highly respected and strong constitutionalists confirmed to the United States Supreme Court. Those 3 he's referring to, Justices Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Attorney General Merrick Garland with his own statement saying the Justice Department strongly disagrees with the court's decision, which deals a devastating blow to reproductive freedom in the United States, and the Justice Department will work tirelessly to protect and advance reproductive freedom. The House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy of California praising the decision, calling it historic. He, too, wants protests to be peaceful, but he also wants the Justice Department to ensure they are.
You know, today's Supreme Court decision in Dobbs is the most important pro-life ruling in American history. By a vote of 6-3, the court affirmed that the power to protect unborn life is returned to the people and their elected representatives. The people have won a victory. The right to life has been vindicated. The voiceless will finally have a voice. This great nation can now live up to its core principle that all are created equal, not born equal, created equal. Americans celebrate this historic victory because we know it will save the lives of millions of children and it will give families hope. But as encouraging as today's decision is, our work is far from done. Americans remain one of only 7 countries on earth that allow elective abortions in the 3rd trimester. Of those 7 countries that America is one of them, there's 2 others, China and North Korea. That is radical. The House Democrats continue to support it against the wishes of the American people. This Congress, every House Democrat has voted for extreme policies, like taxpayer-funded abortion on demand until the point of birth. But Democrats' radical agenda does not have America's support. To the contrary, America rejects it because they remain committed to our values and our principles. The Supreme Court was not bullied by the far-left mob. Threats of violence against the justices did not win. And the truth is, pro-life Americans are not planning a night of rage. The reaction to this principled decision by the court, it must be peaceful. And the DOJ must step up to protect our justices, their families, churches, and pro-life pregnancy centers from unprovoked violence. To the DOJ, do not be silent. Do not stand back and uphold the rule of law. We live in a country that is based on the dignity of all human life.
Congressman Kevin McCarthy, Democrat from California, minority leader at a news conference. Former Vice President Mike Pence, who's considering a run for president in 2024, with a statement on the Supreme Court overturning Roe. He says, having been given this second chance for life, we must not rest and must not relent until the sanctity of life is restored to the center of American law in every state in the land. Vice President Kamala Harris reacting. She was in Plainfield, Illinois.
This is a health care crisis. Because understand, millions of women in America will go to bed tonight without access to the health care and reproductive care that they had this morning, without access to the same health care or reproductive health care that their mothers and grandmothers had for 50 years. This is the first time in the history of our nation that a constitutional right has been taken from the people of America.
Vice President Kamala Harris today in Illinois. Democratic U.S. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, chair of the Judiciary Committee, scheduling a hearing on what he calls a post-Roe America. And he criticizes today's opinion, writing, the Supreme Court now says a woman's right to privacy does not extend to the most personal, private choice she will ever face. That hearing is for July 12th. We'll have coverage on the C-SPAN networks. This is Washington Today. The future of federal family planning, the grant program known as Title X, including abortion policy, was discussed today by Assistant Health and Human Services Secretary Dr. Rachel Levine, part of the conversation with Alan Weil, Editor-in-Chief of Health Affairs.
I'm going to change subjects slightly. Another equity issue, again, particularly in light of the court's decision today, is Title X, the Family Planning Program, which has been, like many others on topics of its kind, the subject of significant political pressure and some change of direction in the prior administration relative to the current administration. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the goals currently for Title X, what evidence-based policies you feel are needed at this point, and how those maybe contrast to where the program has been.
Sure. So Title X is such a critically important public health measure, providing family planning services as well as sexually transmitted disease testing and treatment services, cancer screening services, and more to women and men throughout the country, adolescents and those that require those services. I have to tell you that Title X has been in my blood. I worked in a Title X clinic in my fellowship at Mount Sinai in 1987. And I actually ran a Title X clinic when I was the head of adolescent medicine at Penn State in Hershey, Pennsylvania. We had a Title X clinic and I ran that clinic. So I actually know firsthand how important those services are. One of the victories of public health over the last 30 or more years has been the consistently declining unintended pregnancy rate. It's been declining for 30 or 35 years, and the consistent decline in the adolescent pregnancy rate. And so it has been so important in a public health victory. That is based upon the work that is evidenced in Title X, in the Teenage Pregnancy Prevention Program, and comprehensive sex education in our schools that have led to many of those public health victories that I would like to think that everyone would agree on, although probably not. But the evidence actually in the pediatric and adolescent medicine literature and in the family planning literature is extremely clear about the progress that we have made. Title X is integral to that. So there were significant challenges in the previous administration with the gag rule that you couldn't mention abortion in Title X clinics. Many previously funded Title X clinics left the program, including all of Planned Parenthood and many other clinics throughout the nation. The program shrunk by almost a third and was significantly at risk. So we have made significant changes in the Title X program in the last year and a half. We have promulgated new rules and regulations at record time to get rid of the gag rule and to restore Title X to its previous robust level. And I'm pleased to say that we had an extremely active Title X funding opportunity and funding over the last year that has brought back, many of those clinics. One of the challenges that we've had is that we were flat funded this year. We had asked for significantly more funding in the 2022 budget, but we were flat funded. So unfortunately, we had clinics that were approved, but not funded because we ran out of money. And so we have asked for significantly increased funding in the 2023 budget. And we look to Congress to fully fund our program so we can fund those great clinics throughout the country that were found to be extremely appropriate and excellent clinics, but we completely ran out of money to be able to fund them. And we're looking for more funding with Title X. And as you said, that'll be even more important in light of the Supreme Court decision today.
Dr. Rachel Levine, Assistant Health and Human Services Secretary for Health Affairs, in a virtual conversation with Alan Weil, Editor-in-Chief of Health Affairs. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN has unfiltered coverage of the House January 6 committee hearings investigating the attack on the Capitol. Go to cspan.org/January6, our web resource page, to watch the latest videos of the hearings, briefings, and all of our coverage on the attack and subsequent investigation since January 6, 2021. We'll also have reaction from members of Congress and the White House, as well as journalists and authors talking about the investigation. Go to cspan.org/January6 for a fast and easy way to watch when you can't see it live.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. From the New York Times, Congress gave final approval on Friday to a bipartisan compromise intended to stop dangerous people from accessing firearms, ending nearly 3 decades of congressional inaction over how to counter gun violence and toughen the nation's gun laws. The House approved the measure 234 to 193, 1 month to the day after a gunman stormed into an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, and used a semi-automatic rifle to kill 19 children and 2 teachers, sparking outrage across the country and a flurry of negotiations on Capitol Hill. The measure now heads to President Biden, who is expected to sign it. Reporting from the New York Times. Here's some debate before the vote on the House floor from the leaders of the Judiciary Committee, starting with the chair, Democrat Gerald Nadler.
We take a historic first step toward ending the epidemic of gun violence in this nation, the only developed nation with this problem. We come to this moment after the tragic loss of so many innocent lives. 10 African Americans in Buffalo targeted because of their race. 19 young students and 2 teachers in Uvalde just a few days short of their summer vacations. Scores more lost in other mass shootings too numerous to mention, and over 100 more Americans killed every day in gun violence that never makes the headlines. No piece of legislation can ever bring these lives back. No legislation can make their families or their communities whole. But we can act to keep others from facing the same trauma that they have endured. A few weeks ago, I was proud to bring forth the Protecting Our Kids Act, which took a bipartisan and comprehensive approach to ending gun violence. I am pleased that the Senate incorporated portions of that bill into their own legislation. I wish there was more. I wish we could say we were doing everything we could to prevent another parent from losing their child to gun violence. But I am proud that we're making an important start today. This cannot be the last step, but we also cannot let another day go by without taking action to make our communities safer and to keep even one more family whole. Recently, I have turned to a particular teaching in the Talmud. Whoever takes one life, it's as if he kills the entire world. And whoever saves one life, it's as if he saves the entire world. This legislation includes provisions that will save many lives. Like the Protecting Our Kids Act, it includes funding to implement extreme risk protection laws and a prohibition on straw purchasing. It also strengthens background checks for those under 21, makes more sellers responsible for conducting background checks, takes steps to address the boyfriend loophole, and provides significant funding for programs that will make our communities safer. Today, we will send legislation to the President's desk for the first time in decades that will make progress toward ending the scourge of gun violence.
Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, Judiciary Committee Chair on the House floor. The committee's ranking Republican, Jim Jordan of Ohio, opposed the bill, particularly the red flag law provisions.
This legislation tells states, someone who doesn't like you can report you to law enforcement or to a judge. There will be a hearing where you can't be at, your lawyer can't be at, you can't confront your accuser, you didn't commit any crime, but they can take your property. They can take your gun, they can take your guns, they can take away your Second Amendment rights. And then you have to petition to have a subsequent hearing where you get them back. That's what this legislation does. And understand this, and this is so important. This is not being done in a vacuum. Understand what we have seen from the left and how they have weaponized a government against their political enemies. 12 years ago, it was the IRS targeting conservatives. 6 years ago, it was the FBI spying on President Trump's campaign. More recently, it was the Department of Justice using counterterrorism measures against moms and dads. Just a few weeks ago, the Department of Homeland Security set up the Disinformation Governance Board. It's going to chill everyone's speech. Today, they're coming after your Second Amendment liberties. Here's the good news. Here's the good news. Yesterday, the Supreme Court got it right. They got it right when it came to the Second Amendment. We should celebrate that, and we should do everything we can. I hope this doesn't pass. It seems like it's going to, but I hope it doesn't. And I would urge a no vote, Mr. Speaker, and would reserve the balance of our time.
Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, on the House floor. C-SPAN's Capitol Hill producer Craig Kaplan tweeting, 234 to 193. House approves the Senate bipartisan anti-gun violence bill. 14 Republicans joined all Democrats in voting yes. Senate passed the bill yesterday, 65 to 33, and now heads to President Biden, who plans to sign it into law. By the way, in that Senate vote, there were 15 Republican senators voting yes, more than the 60 needed to overcome any potential filibuster. President Biden traveling to Germany this weekend for the G7 Leaders Summit, a group of top industrialized nations of the world, and then on to the NATO summit. Today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Berlin, Germany, for a pre-G7 ministerial meeting. At a news conference, he was asked about U.S. military support for Ukraine in the continuing war after Russia's invasion. This question from Missy Ryan of The Washington Post.
Yesterday, you mentioned the $450 million, the latest drawdown. In response to that, the ranking Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee welcomed the drawdown, but also said that the administration, in his view, is still failing to go far enough in providing weapons that Ukraine has requested, like longer-range drones and tanks. What's your response to the idea that the United States and its allies, despite this massive amount of assistance that's being rolled out, are arming Ukraine enough to maintain a stalemate or perhaps have this slow degrading of its territory, but not enough to win?
What we've done at every step along the way is to make the best determination we can about what it is that Ukraine needs and can effectively use to repel the Russian aggression. And that evolves over time. That's changed over time. Some of the systems that we and many others were providing to the Ukrainians to deal with a Russian attack on Kyiv were different from what is necessary now, because the nature of the battle has changed, the nature of what's needed has changed. As I mentioned, this is now the 13th drawdown that we've done, well over $6 billion in assistance just from the United States. And of course, dozens of allies and partners are also taking part in an effort, coordinated by us, Secretary Austin, in Ramstein just a couple of months ago, brought everyone together to really further coordinate these efforts. And we make determinations every day about what we believe can be most effective in helping the Ukrainians deal with the Russian aggression and the specifics of that aggression. Two things are necessary. The equipment itself, which is being provided very rapidly, to include most recently the HIMARS, to include most recently the MLRS, and that significantly increases the range that the Ukrainians have in dealing with Russian artillery positions and other things. It's also critical, though, that in the case of weapon systems being provided by many countries, including the United States, that the Ukrainians be effectively trained to use the system, as well as have the ability to maintain them. So all of that has to be put together. We're doing that, and again, we're doing that in very close coordination with allies and partners, and I think you'll see as more equipment continues to get where it needs to get and into Ukrainian hands, that will have an impact on the battlefield.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Germany, a meeting of ministers before the G7 nations leaders, including President Biden, arrive. Title of the meeting today, Uniting for Global Food Security. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warning in a video message that the world faces catastrophe because of the growing shortage of food, and that Russia's war in Ukraine has added to the disruptions caused by climate change, the coronavirus pandemic, and inequality. Guterres says there is a real risk that multiple famines will be declared in 2022, and 2023 could be even worse. From Associated Press, Dateline London, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson suffered a double blow as voters rejected his Conservative Party in two special parliamentary elections dominated by questions about his leadership and ethics. He was further wounded when the party's chairman quit after the results came out early Friday, saying Conservatives cannot carry on with business as usual. Prime Minister Johnson took a reporter's questions about this while traveling to Rwanda.
Let's go first to Alex Forsyth of the BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You've been talking about the work that you are doing on the global stage, but isn't it the reality that some voters don't like the work that you're doing at home? You've lost what was a solid Conservative seat, you've lost a seat you won less than 3 years ago, and you've lost your party chairman. Have you considered, Prime Minister, that perhaps you are part of the problem?
I think that, of course, people are going to want to look at, political impacts and the impacts on party politics of these by-elections. But I just remind you of the context in which we're operating. The world, as I've just said, the UK, other parts of the world are facing the price shocks caused by not just supply chain problems we've seen post-COVID, also by the war in Ukraine. We're dealing with those with a huge amount of fiscal firepower, so £1,200 for the 8 million most vulnerable households coming into people's bank accounts next month, tax cuts for the vast majority of people paying national insurance contributions, and also, of course, focusing on the ways we can, as I said, bear down on people's costs more generally. So, look, I'm not going to pretend these are brilliant results. We've got to listen, we've got to learn. But it wasn't that long ago, only just over a year ago, that we won a spectacular by-election victory. When people are finding it tough, they send messages to politicians, and politicians have got to respond, and that's what we're doing. I think the fundamentals in the UK economy are good, but we've got to recognise that times are tough for people right now. But I think we have the right programme, the right plan for a stronger economy to get our country through it and come out stronger the other side.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. BBC News reports that the former Tory leader Michael Howard says Johnson should resign for the good of the Tory party, believes the country will be better off under new leadership. Boris Johnson, by the way, in Rwanda for the Commonwealth Leaders Summit. The Commonwealth, originally an association of former British colonies, but according to their website, now any country can join, and Rwanda was the last in 2009. On Wall Street, the Dow up 823, S&P up 116, NASDAQ up 375. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more top Washington stories sent to you every day with C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day, we're taking your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Saturday morning, our focus will be the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Joining us will be Constitutional Accountability Center President Elizabeth Wydra and Zach Smith from the Heritage Foundation. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Saturday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.